As the afternoon progressed, the sky over the small town of Jackson took on a heavy gray tone. The streets, almost deserted, seemed to have received the imminent warning of rain, advising people to stay indoors. For many, that day wouldn't be particularly noteworthy, but for Alan O'Brien, the shift at the police station was about to take an unexpected turn. Alan, 25 years old, had been serving on the police force for 3 years. He was known for his determination, which sometimes blended with a certain air of arrogance. Raised in the suburbs, in a middle-class home, Alan was familiar with the racial tensions that were a constant, almost imperceptible whisper, but always present in his daily life. He exuded confidence, a product of his youth and initial success in his career. Tall, with short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, Alan had a presence that could be intimidating, though he harbored a softer side, rarely revealed. However, there was a shadow within him, a doubt he couldn't explain, which occasionally led him to be excessively strict. That day, this shadow directed him towards a young man walking on the south side of town, a predominantly African-American area. Mateus, 33 years old, was a robust and serene man. He had fought hard to get where he was, and he wasn't the type to be easily intimidated. His dark skin reflected the humidity in the air, and his features, marked by a blend of pride and humility, were a testament to the struggles he had overcome to become who he was. Raised by his devout mother in a Catholic church, Mateus had learned early on that a man's dignity didn't depend on his color but on how he faced adversity. As he went on his way, dressed in a dark suit that highlighted his elegance, Mateus noticed a police car slowly approaching. The barely audible sound of the siren caught his attention, awakening a mix of curiosity and caution within him. Alan, behind the wheel, watched Mateus with analytical eyes. To Alan, seeing a well-dressed black man in a neighborhood like that was reason enough for inquiry. "Hey, you, where do you think you're going?" Alan shouted as he approached. Mateus, surprised by the aggressive tone, remained calm, aware that any movement could be misinterpreted. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm going to a meeting," Mateus replied politely, though a slight trace of irritation passed through his eyes. Alan got out of the car and walked towards Mateus, his boots echoing on the wet pavement. The height difference between the two was evident, but the perceived power difference was even greater. Alan scrutinized Mateus from head to toe, observing every detail, the suit, the watch, and finally the face, as if he were searching for some clue of guilt. "A meeting, huh? And what kind of meeting would that be? You don't seem to be from around here." Mateus took a deep breath, controlling the anger that was beginning to boil within him. It wasn't the first time he'd been stopped without reason, but this time, the atmosphere felt more tense, as if something could go out of control at any moment. "It's a business meeting, officer. I don't see why this should delay me," Mateus replied, trying to stay calm. Alan let out a dry laugh that echoed off the surrounding walls. "Work, of course. I know how it is. Show me your ID, and make it quick." Mateus nodded slowly and, with careful movements, took out his wallet, taking precautions not to provoke any unwanted reaction from Alan. He handed over his ID and watched as Alan examined it with a look of disdain. "Cristiano Mateus," Alan murmured. "And where do you say you work?" Before Mateus could respond, a voice on Alan's radio interrupted the tense moment. It was an urgent call from the station, requesting the immediate return of all officers, as something important was about to happen. Alan tossed the ID back to Mateus with a dismissive gesture. "Get out of here before I change my mind," Alan said, turning and heading back to his car. Mateus picked up his ID from the ground, keeping a neutral expression, though he felt the humiliation burning inside. Instead of responding with sarcasm or anger, he simply turned and continued on his way. He knew that the real moment of justice was yet to come. The next morning, the station was filled with a palpable sense of nervousness. Rumors circulated among the officers that something big was about to happen. Alan arrived and noticed the furtive glances from his colleagues, who whispered among themselves. Captain Robert, a middle-aged man with a graying beard and a deep voice, had been even more reserved in recent days, and now the reason seemed about to be revealed. "Attention, officers, gather in the conference room," Captain Robert ordered, without needing to raise his voice, but with a tone that left no room for argument. Alan followed his colleagues into the room, feeling a slight chill at the back of his neck. He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, except for the encounter with that man in the southern part of town. This wasn't out of the ordinary. The police often faced similar situations, especially in a town like Jackson. When everyone was gathered, Captain Robert cleared his throat to get their attention. "I want you all to know that today we will be welcoming a new police chief," he announced, letting the news sink into the minds of those present. The tension in the room increased, and Alan felt it clearly. "He is someone who has worked hard to get here, and I'm sure he will bring significant changes to our unit. So, I want everyone to give him the respect he deserves." The murmurs intensified. A new chief meant changes, which for some was not exactly welcome. Alan was especially apprehensive. His position in the team was solid, but the arrival of a new leader could threaten that stability. Finally, the door to the room opened, and the new police chief walked in. The murmurs instantly ceased, and all eyes turned to the figure who walked in with firm steps. It was Chris Mateus, dressed in an impeccably dark suit, the same man Alan had approached with disdain the previous afternoon. Alan's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to a mix of fear and shame. Mateus walked to the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over each of the officers, who watched him with a blend of surprise and respect. When his eyes met Alan's, he maintained his composure, but a slight smile appeared on his lips. "Good morning, gentlemen," Mateus began in a firm voice. "I'm Chris Mateus, and from today on, I will be your new police chief. I know that some of you already know me, and I hope that over time, we can all get to know each other better." The tension in the room was palpable, almost as if it could be cut with a knife. Alan remained completely still, trying to process what was happening. His mind spun, revisiting every detail of his encounter with Mateus the day before. He felt trapped, uncertain about how to handle the situation unfolding before him. Mateus continued speaking, in a calm but authoritative tone, outlining his vision for the police force and his plans to improve relations with the community. As he spoke, he observed the expression on Alan's face, a man now beginning to understand the weight of his actions. But Mateus was not a vindictive person. His mother had always taught him that true strength lies in compassion and the ability to forgive. And for those of you wondering, yes, I've lived in Jackson for many years. I know this town well, its problems, and the solutions we can implement together. I want you to know that I'm here to work with you, not against you, Mateus concluded, letting his words resonate in the minds of his new subordinates. But I also want to make it clear that I will not tolerate any form of discrimination or abuse of power. This was a new beginning for everyone. Mateus gave Alan one last look, a look that carried no resentment, but rather something much more significant, a chance. An opportunity to learn, grow, and redeem himself. However, he said nothing directly to Alan. It wasn't necessary. What Alan felt at that moment was far deeper than any verbal reprimand could convey. When the meeting ended, discomfort lingered in the air. The officers began to leave the room one by one, murmuring among themselves. Alan remained seated, paralyzed, as his mind replayed the previous day's encounter over and over. He had never felt such a heavy burden on his conscience. Captain Robert approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that was both friendly and cautionary. "You should talk to him, Alan," he said calmly. "This is the time to show what kind of man you are." Alan nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in the captain's words. With some effort, he stood up and left the room. The hallway was nearly empty, but in the distance, he spotted Matthias walking towards his new office. Alan knew he couldn't delay any longer. "Mr. Matthias," he called out, his voice sounding strangely weak. Matthias stopped and slowly turned to face Alan. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Their eyes met once again, but now there was no longer a barrier of authority. They were just two men, one trying to find the right words and the other willing to listen. "I want to apologize for yesterday," Alan said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I didn't know who you were, and I acted in an unforgivable way. I'm sorry and ashamed." Matthias watched him in silence, letting Alan's words sink in. "It doesn't matter to me who I was yesterday, Alan. What matters to me is who you are today," Matthias responded firmly, but with a gentle tone. "We all make mistakes, but the most important thing is how we deal with them. I'm willing to leave this behind, but I need to know if you are too." Alan nodded, feeling a great weight lifted from his shoulders. "Yes, sir, I am," he replied. Matthias extended his hand, and Alan shook it firmly, feeling the strength and warmth in that gesture. In that moment, Alan knew that his life and career were about to change forever. He had learned a lesson that would shape not only his future in the police force but also his role in society as a man capable of acknowledging his mistakes and growing from them. And so, we understand that true strength doesn't lie in the power we wield, but in the humility with which we accept our flaws and the willingness to change for the better. Because, in the end, we all have the capacity to be something greater than our past mistakes. What did you learn from today's story? Write to me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This other video on the screen will also entertain you.